The day Commander Jason Chen introduced pillows to the Zathran warrior cubs was the day he signed his own death warrant, though not in the way anyone expected. Because what started as a simple cultural exchange during humanity's fragile alliance with the galaxy's most feared apex predators ended with him buried under a mountain of fur, claws, and purring that could shake deck plating. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a decorated human pilot went from feared warrior to the galaxy's most protected naptime companion, and how the two Zathran sisters who commanded the flagship almost started an interstellar incident over who got to keep him. Jason had been assigned to the Zathran dreadnought Blood Moon's Fang as part of the new Terran-Zathran military exchange program, a diplomatic nightmare wrapped in the pretty bow of cultural understanding, because 3 months ago these same aliens had been hunting human colony ships for sport until both species realized they had a common enemy in the Kraval swarm, and now here he was, the only human among 8,000 apex predators who looked like someone had crossed a tiger with a wolf, given it opposable thumbs, and taught it how to build warships that could crack planets. But Jason wasn't easily intimidated. He'd survived the Proxima massacre. He'd flown through the void storms of Kepler for to be, and he'd once stared down a swarm queen with nothing but a broken plasma rifle and spite. So when he walked into the officers' mess hall that first day, and every conversation stopped, when 300 pairs of luminescent eyes turned to assess him like prey, he just smiled, grabbed a ration pack, and sat down at the nearest table like he owned the place. That's when he met them, Commander Zarina and her sister, Lieutenant Karesh, the two highest-ranking females on the ship, and daughters of the Zathran War matriarch herself. And they were magnificent in the way that avalanches and supernovas are magnificent, beautiful and absolutely terrifying, because Zathran females were larger than males, averaging 7 feet of corded muscle covered in fur that ranged from deep crimson to midnight black, with retractable claws that could shred titanium and eyes that glowed with an inner light that betrayed their predatory evolution. And these two were exemplary specimens, Zarina with her commander's stripes and fur the color of dried blood, her bearing radiating authority and controlled violence, while Karesh was slightly smaller, but moved with a liquid grace that suggested she could kill you 17 different ways before you hit the ground. And they were staring at him with an intensity that made his combat instincts scream. But Jason had learned long ago that showing fear to predators was the fastest way to become food. So instead he nodded respectfully and said, "Ladies." This seat taken, and the entire mess hall seemed to hold its breath because nobody, absolutely nobody, approached the war matriarch's daughters without permission. But Zarina's ears flicked forward in what he'd later learn was amusement, and she rumbled, "The human has either great courage or great stupidity. Sit, little warrior, let us determine which." That was 3 months ago. And in the time since, Jason had somehow gone from curiosity to colleague to something neither species had quite figured out how to categorize. Because humans and Zathran were discovering they had more in common than either expected. They both valued honor and courage. They both mourned their dead with ceremony. They both loved a good fight and a better story. And Jason's tales of human military operations fascinated the Zathran while their hunting sagas enthralled him. But the real shift came the day he was invited to the officers' training deck and met the cubs. Because Zathran warriors brought their offspring on campaign ships to train them from childhood. And there in the massive gymnasium were 30 younglings ranging from age 5 to 15 in human years, tumbling and play fighting under the watchful eyes of their parents. And they stopped when Jason entered, their ear tufts perking up, their tails bristling with curiosity. Because none of them had seen a human up close before, and the smallest one, a little female, with oversized paws and fur like orange starlight, padded right up to him and chirped, "Are you really the human who FLIs through asteroid fields for fun?" And Jason laughed and knelt down to her level. And that's when chaos erupted, because suddenly he was surrounded by 30 curious cubs, all asking questions at once, touching his uniform, sniffing his hair, comparing their retractable claws to his blunt fingernails, with obvious confusion about how such a defenseless creature survived in the galaxy. And their instructor, a grizzled male named Torvin, was about to intervene when Jason started answering their questions, telling them about Earth, about oceans and forests, about animals that had no claws or fangs, but survived through speed or camouflage or intelligence. And the cubs listened with rapt attention, because their entire worldview was predator and prey, strong and weak. and Jason was introducing them to a universe of gray areas that their young minds found fascinating. The pillow incident happened 2 weeks later, during what was supposed to be a basic cultural exchange presentation. Jason was showing the cubs human comfort items, explaining how humans created tools and technology to make up for their physical limitations, and he'd brought basic things: a jacket, a water bottle, a book, and a pillow from his quarters. And when he demonstrated the pillow's purpose, laying his head on it and explaining how humans needed soft surfaces for rest because they didn't have thick fur for cushioning, the cubs were mesmerized, because Zathran slept in piles for warmth and protection, usually on hard surfaces or thin mats. The concept of deliberate softness for comfort was alien to them. And before Jason knew what was happening, the smallest cub, the one named Shira with the starlight fur, had climbed onto his chest as he demonstrated lying down, curled up, and started purring. And purring for Zathran wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration that resonated through their entire body, a sign of complete trust and contentment, and within seconds every other cub wanted to try it. And Jason found himself at the center of a growing pile of purring younglings, each one trying to get closer to the soft human who makes comfort objects. And Torvin was laughing so hard he had to lean against the wall because the fierce human pilot, the one who'd earned 3 kill marks against swarm frigates, was being buried alive under 30 purring cubs and couldn't even pretend to be upset about it. And that's when Zarina and Karesh walked in to check on the training session. The two sisters stopped dead in the doorway, their ears swiveling forward in shock, because what they saw defied every instinct and protocol. A human, their human exchange officer, was completely invisible under a mountain of their people's cubs, all of whom were purring so loudly the deck plates were vibrating. And this should have been concerning, should have been inappropriate. Except both sisters felt something unexpected. A warm pulling sensation in their chests that their species associated with pack bonding and protection instinct. Because in Zathran culture, anyone whom the cubs trusted so completely was someone worthy of the pack's protection. And both Zarina and Karesh felt it simultaneously, which became a problem because Zathran females were territorial about their chosen pack members, and they locked eyes over the purring cub pile. And Torvin, who was still laughing, suddenly stopped because he recognized that look. He'd seen it before during mating challenges and territory disputes. And he quietly started ushering other adults out of the gymnasium, because what was about to happen was between the war matriarch's daughters and nobody else needed to be caught in the crossfire. Jason, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to the brewing storm because he was trapped under purring cubs and actually finding it kind of nice. The weight was comforting, the purring was surprisingly soothing. And he was thinking maybe he understood why cats were so popular on Earth. But then he heard Karesh's voice, low and smooth like honey over gravel. The human seems to have won the cub's affection, sister. Perhaps he should transfer to my tactical division, where such trust-building skills would be valuable. And Zarina's response came equally smooth but edged with steel. The human is assigned to command operations, sister. He remains under my authority. And Jason felt the temperature in the room drop about 20 degrees. Not literally, but definitely metaphorically. And he tried to sit up, but the cubs weren't budging. They'd found their new favorite sleeping spot and weren't about to give it up. And he managed to extract his head enough to see the two sisters facing each other with expressions he'd learned meant trouble. Their tails lashing, their ear tufts laid back, their claws extended just slightly. All signs of agitation. And he said, ladies, is there a problem? And both of them turned to look at him with such intense focus that his combat instincts started screaming again. And Karesh moved closer, her movements predatory and purposeful. And she said, tell me, Jason Chen, do you understand what it means when Zathran cubs choose someone? And he admitted he didn't, not really. And Karesh smiled, showing way too many teeth, and explained, it means they have claimed you as pack. It means you are now under the protection of every warrior whose cub lies upon you. It means you have become precious. And the way she said that last word made something in Jason's stomach flip, and Zarina moved to his other side, equally predatory, equally focused, and she added, it also means that any who would claim responsibility for your safety and well-being must prove worthy of that honor. Isn't that right, sister? And Karesh's eyes flashed. Indeed, sister, which is why I propose we allow Jason to choose, since he is the one whom the cubs have honored. The cubs, sensing the tension, had stopped purring and were watching with The avid interest of younglings who knew drama was unfolding. And little Shira whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Are the commanders fighting over the soft human?" And another cub responded, "Mother says when females fight over a male it means they want him for their pack." And Jason's brain kind of short-circuited because wait, what? That's what this was about. And he looked between the two sisters, who were watching him with an intensity that was part predatory assessment and part something else he couldn't quite identify. And Karesh said softly, "Choose, Jason Chen. Choose which of us you wish to claim as pack leader. Choose whose protection you will accept. Choose whose den you will share." And Zarina added, equally soft, but with an edge of challenge, "Or refuse us both and insult the honor the cubs have given you. Those are your options, human." And Jason realized with growing horror that he'd somehow stumbled into what was essentially a Zathran courtship challenge, and these two sisters weren't just arguing over professional jurisdiction, they were arguing over him. And the worst part was, he couldn't even figure out when it had happened, when he'd gone from the weird human exchange officer to someone worth competing over. And he opened his mouth, but no words came out, because what do you even say in this situation? And little Shira, bless her oblivious heart, chirped, "I think he should choose both, then nobody has to fight." And every adult in the room froze, because from the mouths of cubs, and Karesh and Zarina looked at each other, and something passed between them. Some silent sister communication, and they both started laughing, deep rumbling purrs of amusement, and Zarina said, "The cub speaks wisdom, sister. Why should we fight when we could share?" And Karesh's tail swished in agreement, "Indeed. We have shared everything else since cubhood. Why not this strange, wonderful human who makes comfort objects and lets our young sleep on him?" And Jason was about to protest that he wasn't an object to be shared, when Karesh added, "Of course. This means he belongs to both of us now. He accepts our protection, shares our dens, joins our pack fully." And Zarina moved closer, her massive frame blocking out the light. "Do you accept, Jason Chen? Do you accept the bond our cubs have created and the pack we offer?" And Jason, still covered in purring cubs, still processing everything, thought about the last 3 months, thought about how isolated he'd been since the war started, how the Proxima massacre had taken his entire squadron, how he'd been drifting through duty without connection. And here were these fierce alien warriors offering him belonging, offering him family of a sort, offering him a place in their pack. And the cubs were watching with hope in their luminescent eyes. And he realized that somehow, impossibly, he wanted this. Wanted to be part of something again, wanted to matter to someone, so he said, "I accept, but I have one condition." And both sisters' ears perked forward in surprise because they hadn't expected negotiation. And Jason continued, "I need to understand what this actually means." "What?" "I'm agreeing to, because I don't want to accidentally break some cultural taboo and end up dishonoring you." And Karesh's expression softened into something almost tender. "It means you are ours to protect and we are yours to rely upon. It means your enemies are our enemies, your victories, our pride, your safety, our responsibility. It means pack, it means family, it means you're no longer alone in this galaxy." And Jason felt something tight in his chest loosen because that he understood, that he wanted, and he said, "Then yes, I accept." And the cubs erupted in happy chirps, and the purring resumed with doubled intensity, and Zarina and Karesh both moved closer, both reached out to touch his shoulders in. What he'd learned was a gesture of claiming and acceptance. And their purring joined the cubs and Jason closed his eyes and let himself be buried under the weight of his new pack, let himself feel safe for the first time in years. That was 6 months ago. And the galaxy was still trying to figure out what to make of the situation. Because word had spread that the war matriarch's daughters had claimed a human as pack, and it had caused quite a stir in both human and Zathran command structures, but the results were undeniable. The human-Zathran alliance had strengthened, cultural understanding had deepened, and the combined fleet had pushed the swarm back 3 systems. And Jason had become something of a legend, the human who slept under a mountain of Zathran cubs and warriors, who had 2 of the fiercest females in the galaxy competing to see who could protect him better, who had somehow turned deadly apex predators into his family. And the pillow thing had caught on too, because after seeing how much the cubs loved them, Zathran engineers had started manufacturing them, and now half the warrior caste slept with pillows. And Jason took an absurd amount of pride in that, in knowing he'd introduced the galaxy's most feared predators to the concept of comfort. And every night when he settled into the den he now shared with Zarina and Karesh, when the cubs piled on for their evening procession, when the two sisters curled protectively around him like he was something precious worth guarding, he thought about how strange his life had become, how he'd found family in the least likely place, and how sometimes the best bonds were the ones you never saw coming. And little Shira, who'd claimed permanent residence on his chest during sleep time, would chirp sleepily, tell us about Earth again, about the oceans and the soft animals, and Jason would talk until the cubs drifted off, and Karesh would rumble contentedly, "You are good with younglings, our pack is lucky to have you," and Zarina would add, "The cubs are not the only ones who find comfort in your presence, human," and Jason would fall asleep to the sound of purring, surrounded by fur and warmth and belonging. Buried under a mountain of family he'd never expected, but couldn't imagine living without. And he'd think that maybe the war matriarch's daughters hadn't chosen him at all. Maybe the cubs had known what they were doing when they first climbed on him. Maybe they'd sensed a broken warrior who needed a pack as much as the pack needed someone who could teach them about comfort and softness in a harsh galaxy. And as he drifted off, with Shira purring on his chest and the two sisters flanking him like living shields, Jason Chen smiled, because he'd finally found what he'd been searching for since Proxima. He'd found home, and it turned out home was a purring pile of apex predators who'd decided he was worth protecting. And honestly, there were worse fates in the galaxy than being loved by creatures who could crack planets, but chose instead to curl around you like you were precious. And the last thought Jason had before sleep took him was that he needed to requisition more pillows because the entire warrior caste wanted them now. And wasn't that just the most ridiculous and wonderful legacy, the human who taught predators to nap in comfort? The warrior who defeated the galaxy's fiercest species, not with weapons, but with softness. And somewhere in the peaceful darkness of sleep, wrapped in purrs and protection, Jason finally felt at peace.